October is Creole Language Month, and so I thought it would be a good idea to try to debunk the myths and understand the debates around Creole languages. And I will try to explain issues that I'm often asked about as a professor in the Speech Language Pathology department. Okay. So there are current discussions in higher education, including in speech language pathology, but that happens across the board in higher education. And that's how to diversify the field of language sciences. And people call it decolonizing the curriculum. And with respect to language sciences, some people have applied critical race theories to try to understand how we can do language analysis in a different way. In education, educators, theorists, scientists have appealed to the students' funds of knowledge in order to kind of acknowledge what students have to bring to the task of learning. And in speech language pathology, we have inherited concepts such as cultural competence and humanities that come from nursing. And all these approaches are very relevant to kind of studying Creole languages and their speakers, but there are also conceptual obstacles that are rooted in the history of the field. And this is what I want to talk a little bit about before I talk about the current research and how we can try to overcome these obstacles by trying to understand what is debated in the field. I'm going to give an historical perspectives that come from two different branches of science. One is the study of languages that is now called linguistics, but used to be called in the old day philology. On the one hand, so that's one tradition, looking at languages, trying to characterize them, describe their sounds, describe what the concepts that they express, describe how they work, how they are used. So that's one field of study of languages. Another field is that has been making statement and also examining language is the field of developmental and acquired language and communication disorders that's kind of known as the field of speech language pathology. And although these two fields are separate, they kind of intersect in that they're both looking at languages. Okay, and we will see that in both of these fields, across, for kind of a number of centuries now, there has been some definition and some views about what Creoles are in relation to other languages. And I'm adapting a quote from Van Reich here, who was a very famous professor at Columbia University, specializing in Yiddish. And Van Reich said something like this. I'm translating into English because actually he apparently said it in Yiddish in 1943, 1944. He said, "A language is a dialect with an army and a navy." And of course, that's a metaphor for talking. Army and navy are metaphors for talking about power. But when Van Reich made this statement, I'm adapting it and using the word Creole and patois, because in a way, that's also what has happened to languages that are so-called Creole or patois, is that usually they have been given these names because they haven't been when they were first born, when they first emerged, they were not assigned any power. And we'll see that maybe this is changing today. So in order to understand the debates surrounding the naming of languages as Creoles, such as Haitian Creole, Jamaican Creole or Patois, Dominican Creole, etc., we need to understand the origin, where that word Creole comes from. And I could do something similar for patois, but it went a slightly different route, but the kind of assumptions are the same. And also we need to understand the different geographical and cultural context in which these languages are used. So there is a relatively recent book published in 2010 called In a Sea of Heteroglossia that makes reference to the multitude of languages in the Caribbean islands. And there is one of the interesting chapters in that book is looking at the meanings that people assign to the word Creole. And that word is applied to many different artifacts. It's applied to people, it's applied to languages, animals, different cultural artifacts, food, music, etc. It's used differently by different people. It's by native speakers of so-called Creole languages and in different fields. So it's used in cultural studies and linguistics, etc. And the empirical survey conducted in Puerto Rico by the authors of that article shows that some have positive or negative connotations, but the thing is that there is no kind of agreement on what the term kind of means. So if we look at the origin of the word Creole, it appeared in the 16th century in French and Spanish writings, and it appeared following colonization by Europeans, so Britain, Belgium, France, Holland, Portugal, Spain, etc. And it's also tied to the history of slavery. More specifically, the term Creole has been used to name different people and make distinctions at different times in different places between, for instance, white people in Europe and in the colonies. Between white people, people of African origin versus people of mixed race born in the colonies. It's that use that was applied by an author called Gobineau, who wrote a book that is its basis for scientific racism between 1853 and 1855. It's also used to distinguish between Black people born in Africa versus those born in the Caribbean. And, for other colonized islands in the Indian Ocean, Réunion and Mauritius, etc. Okay, so you can see that it has many different meanings for different people, and but the one thing that's in common here across these different meanings is that it's a term used to separate. Okay, that we can. So what about Creoles in terms of in communication and language studies? So the first thing we have to remember is that language contact precedes the 16th century context. So before the countries colonized other, certain places, there was contact between languages. Okay, so for instance, if you think of English, English doesn't sound like German, partly because it came into contact with different languages, including Anglo-Norman French. So there was this language context that happened much before the 16th century, but it's only from the 16th century that this term Creole was used. So we have to understand that there was this desire, this will to disenfranchise Creoles from other languages. And one of the reason for the use of this word was to disenfranchise, to dehumanize, to disempower those who speak those languages. So this started happening in the 16th century. And what's interesting is that it was questioned as early as the end of the 19th century by someone called Antenor Firmin, who, in response to Gobineau's book that forms a kind of basis for scientific racism, his book was called On the Inequality of the Human Race. In response to that book, Firmin wrote a book titled On the Equality of the Human Race. And in that book, he very clearly questions this need to group languages that come out, to call a certain name, those languages that have come out of the contact between colonizers' language and the people from who were working for them in plantations, etc. Okay. For those of you who study speech language pathology, or those of you who study the brain, the anatomy of the brain, I just wanted to mention that Gobineau, Broca, and Firmin, these three people, belong to the same learned societies. They belong to the Society of Anthropology. And I'm mentioning the word Broca because if you study the brain, you know that there is an area of the brain that we call Broca's area. And speech language pathology students know what breaks down when there are issues with which aspect of language is no longer working well. But what fewer people know is that Broca was friend with Gobineau, and actually much of his career was spent on trying to find empirical evidence in support of scientific racism, although he was also the one who enabled Firmin to enter the Society of Anthropology. But despite the writing of Firmin questioning this use of the word Creole, that was not, people kind of continued using that word with the same negative connotation. Okay. For those of you who are studying history, a lot of the work of Firmin is what inspired Diop and to question the origin of Egyptians. Okay, so Firmin today is very well known in the field of anthropology, but not so many people know or are aware that he has actually written as well about Creole languages. But what's interesting is that despite his writing about Creole, it didn't have an impact at the time. So what's happening today after this long history, this history of Creole languages, and the fact that we are in a different period of history? What's going on now in terms of the different positions that people have in the field of linguistics that has implication for how we actually conduct research on these languages, and also what kind of how we serve the speakers of those languages. So there is an older and still prevalent position that Creole languages, those languages that are born into the contact of either English, French, Spanish, etc., with a number of languages from often from different parts of Africa, given that it involves the experience of slavery. This Creole language, one of the some of the authors in the field thinks that Creole languages have specific features that characterize all of them and makes them quite different from other languages, including it makes them easier to learn. This characteristic makes them easier to learn. Okay, so this is a position, for instance, of John McWhorter, who is a professor at Columbia University. Okay. So if they are different from other languages, then there is a reason why, there is a motivation to kind of group them under the term Creole, although they might be very different from one another. However, there is no direct empirical evidence for this position. Okay, there is no data. I mean, it's not clear that there is much empirical work done in order to kind of support this position. There is a more recent position that the position initiated, maybe the better known author, the best known author on this position is De Graaf 2005, who is a professor of Haitian Creole at MIT. Professor of syntax, and happens to be a speaker of Haitian Creole, Fonsing, Henri, etc., where according to them, Creole languages are not exceptional at the linguistic level, so we have to look at them with the same conceptual tools as, the same way to analyze them as any other languages. But their emergence, their history is tied to a very specific sociocultural historical context, that of the plantations. So the use of Creole is justified in order to make reference to that context. And also because although the Creole was a word imposed by the countries that colonized, and it was not a name chosen by the people who spoke that language. So it started as what's called an exonym. An exonym is a name imposed by other people. But some of the groups who speak those languages have reappropriated this term. And, those who are native speakers, some of them, not all of them, we'll talk about this. But for some of them, they have reappropriated this term for themselves. So the exonym has become an endonym in a way. So in order to respect that, we should use the term Creole. And also in the field outside of science, artists have sometimes associated resistance and resilience to the word Creole and find themselves having something in common because they've been minoritized for so long. Creole is often seen as a language of resistance. Okay, so that's another reason why you might want to call all these languages, to have this label on all these languages. Okay, there is another position, a third position. So it's similar to the second, is that there is, they also, according the authors who adopt this position, they think that Creole languages are not exceptional in themselves at the linguistic level, but they differ from the second group because they think that the term Creole was imposed from outside, and it washes away the authorship, the agency of the speakers. So it takes away, if you just say Creole, it takes away that, Jamaican people invented it, that Haitian people invented their language, that Dominican people invented their language, that Belizean invented their language. And it takes away the African and Native Indian and American contribution to the development of the languages. So it kind of, it impedes the emergence and ownership of it impedes ownership of the language by the speakers. Okay, so that's another position where, so then the position is that we should just say Haitian, Jamaican, Belizean, etc. Okay, so there are different people who have adopted this position. Okay. So what's happening with respect to the current research? So the people who kind of subscribe to the 2 second concepts of Creoles and, name them like Creole or not Creole, but assume that they are not exceptional as languages. They can be studied just like any other languages. There has been a recent study and much more empirical study on the acquisition of different Creole languages. So Carla Washington and other people have looked at both Jamaican English and Jamaican Patois. My colleague Justin Archer has done work on the development of phonology in Haitian Creole. I myself have done work on the development of Haitian Creole from a more like the sentence structure perspective. So we have more and more work on looking at developmental stage that documents that the developmental stages of these languages are just like any language, are not learned more quickly, faster than any other languages. It's important to kind of document them because they are languages, and we need more and more documentation of more and more languages in order to understand how children develop language. It's also crucial to the speakers of those languages that we understand more about those languages and how they develop and how they break down in case of impairment, so we can provide them with appropriate services. Okay, so there are many speakers of Jamaican, of Haitian, of Dominican, of Trinidadian, etc., in the tri-state area. And these people need services as well, but we won't be able to provide them if we don't understand how their languages work. Okay, and I just wanted to mention that at St. Elizabeth, we are going to the island of Dominica in the summer, where there are two of these so-called Creoles, one that borrowed its lexicon from French, when the other borrowed its lexicon from English, but was the island's official, the island language of education is English. Okay, so we'll be doing more work on this. But there is more and more work on these languages, and it's really important that it continues. Thank you.